welcome to Vetscope. In this video, we'll be looking at creating client statements. Statements can be ran for any date range and for all clients at the same time. To do this, click on the Reports button from the main menu. Once in the Reports screen, under the default Client tab, click on the Print Statements button. You will then receive a prompt to run the Check Allocations function. This needs to be done every time before printing statements, as allocation errors can cause discrepancies on your client's statements. If you haven't already run the Check Allocations function, click the Check button. Allocations will then be checked and you'll be prompted to fix any errors. Once the Check Allocation function has been ran and any allocation errors have been fixed, the statements can then be created. Click on the Print Statements button. When the prompt to check allocations appears, we can now click Skip, as this has already been completed. Next is a prompt asking whether we want to print statements for one client or for all. As we want to print statements for all relevant clients at the same time, we can click on All. In this prompt, we can enter the start date and the end date for the statements. Any transactions within this time frame will appear line by line on the statement. You can enter any time frame you like, but typically the time frame is a month. Vetscope by default will automatically have the first and last date of the previous month entered for your convenience. There is also the option to only print statements for clients that have balances over a certain amount. The default is 0, but it can be changed here to any amount you want. Once you are satisfied with the time frame and the minimum balance amount, click OK to continue. Next is the statement date. This is simply the date that will go on each statement as the date of creation. The default will be the current day's date, but it can be changed to whatever date you want. This prompt asks if you want the statement to reflect the client's balance based on the end date of the time frame entered or the balance on the day of printing. The common practice is to choose the end date of the time frame, so to do this, we'll click on Date. Next is this prompt regarding the age date. On the statement, the client balance is broken down by age, the default being what is over 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. The age date is the date that this breakdown is counted from. You can enter what date you prefer. The common practice is to use the end date of the statement date range, which by default will already be entered. This next prompt allows you the option to enter criteria to select which accounts to print statements for. In the account code field, if you want to create statements for only certain clients, you can use their account codes. You can enter a range of account codes by entering the first account code to use and then 2 full stops and then the last account code to use. You can also use the greater than or less than symbols. The default is greater than or equal to 1, which will include all client account codes. You also have the option of using a contact name or an organization name as criteria. If you just want to do a normal statement run for all relevant clients, however, you can go with the default criteria that is already entered and click OK. This next prompt allows for entering wording that will appear at the bottom of every statement. This is typically used to display the practice's banking details and any other general information for the clients. Once wording is entered here, it will remain in place for future printing until manually changed. If you do not want to include any wording, you can just leave this blank. This prompt gives you the option to exclude accounts with email addresses. If you have email set up in Vetscope and are using the email statements process, this option can prevent you from unnecessarily printing out statements for clients that will be receiving them by email. To leave clients with email addresses out, click on Yes. Otherwise, click No. If you use categories in the client screen, this prompt gives you the option to print for certain categories only. This, however, is just available for categories set up in the Category 1, 2, and 5 columns. To print for a certain category, click into its relative location in the prompt and type it in. If you do not want to print based on categories, just leave it blank and click OK. This prompt gives the option to report by month. If you are printing statements for a time frame that spans a few months, using this option will group the lines on the statement together by month. If not selected, the lines in the statement will still be displayed in chronological order. If you are only printing statements for a single month's time frame, reporting by month is not necessary. The statements are now being compiled for printing. This may take some time, so it is best to let the system work away and not click into anything else in the meantime. Once they are finished being compiled, you'll get a preview of the statements. You can use the arrows at the top left to review any before printing. To move on, either press Enter on your keyboard or just click Continue in the top right corner. Next, you have the option to export the lines from the statements to Excel. You can click Yes to create the Excel file or No to continue on. The statements are now ready to print. In the printing prompt, ensure that the correct printer is selected. Also, ensure that the Print Records Being Browsed setting is in place. Before clicking on Print, make sure your printer has plenty of paper in it and is not low on ink. The statements will now start printing. This may take some time depending on the amount of statements and the speed of your printer. You will now receive a prompt asking whether you want to print statements for clients that do not have transactions within the selected period. These are clients that have a balance, however, the balance is made up of transactions that occurred previous to the time frame that was entered at the start of the statement process. Common practice is to print these as well as part of the statement run. So just as before, there is the option to only print statements that have balances over a certain amount. It is important that the minimum balance entered here is the same as what was entered previously. Changing this will cause inconsistencies in your statement run. You also have the option to enter wording that will appear at the bottom of this type of statement. This wording will remain in place until manually changed. If you do not want to enter any wording, you can just leave it blank and click OK. This next prompt gives you the option to include accounts that have balances from transactions that occurred after the end date that you entered. The common practice for this is to click No, as those statements will be included in the next statement run. A preview of the statements will now be displayed. These statements show the age breakdown of the client balance and not an itemization like the previous statements that were created. You can use the arrows at the top left to review any before printing. To move on, press either Enter on the keyboard or click Continue in the top right corner. Your printing options will now appear. Just as before, ensure the correct printer is selected, and before clicking Print, make sure your printer has plenty of paper and is not low on ink. Now let's look at when you just want to print a single statement. From the main menu, click on the Clients and Supplier button. Search for the client you want to print the statement for. Once the client's details are on the screen, click on the Print Statement button on the left. Just as in the previous process, enter a date range for the statements and click OK. Same as before, you're given the option to sort by month. If this is not necessary, you can click on Skip. Next is the wording for the bottom of the statement. The wording that is currently in this field will be the same as what was entered when printing the statements in bulk. If that is the wording you want to use, click OK. Keep in mind that if you do change the wording here, it will also be changed for the statements next time you print in bulk. The preview of the statement will now display. If the statement is more than one page, you can use the arrows in the top left of the screen to see each page. To move on, press either the Enter key on the keyboard or click the Continue button on the top right of the screen. If you have email set up, this next prompt gives you the option to email the statement. If you do not want to use this option, click Cancel. When the printing prompt appears, ensure the correct printer is selected and click on Print. There is also the option to print a statement that displays all unpaid items that the client still owes on, regardless of when they occurred. To print this type of statement, click on the Print Statement button like before. When the date range prompt appears, click on the button labeled Owing. If there are any dates entered in the date range fields, this is fine, as it will not have an impact on this process. A preview of the statement will now appear. This statement shows all the outstanding items that make up this client's balance. You can use the arrows in the top left to move through the pages if needed. When you are ready to print, either press Enter on the keyboard or click the Continue button on the top right of the screen. Same as before, if you have email set up, this prompt gives you the option to email the statement. If not, click Cancel. The prompt to print will now appear. Ensure the correct printer is selected and click Print. That concludes this video. If you have any questions, please contact VetScope.